I'm really happy to be here today to continue a conversation that started in the summer last year. So it really began with our colleagues, Sarah Kaplan's article in Fast Company, where she asked the question, or really an call to action article, telling us that, instead of thinking about building, rebuilding, having things go back to normal, it was a common refrain for all of us wishing that, when we get back to normal, we're going to be doing this and, we just can't wait to go back. What Sarah was saying in her article was that we need to not be thinking about going back to normal because really normal wasn't that great. I mean, there were many inequities that were happening. Jobs were not accessible or inclusive as we wanted it to be. And our climate was and still is in crisis. So this article was really calling on us to think about what we can do and what we should be doing when we think about this, when we emerge from this crisis. What should we be looking at? What should we be considering? And how we can build back better, right? So this crisis really shouldn't be something that we want to weather, but we should look at ways to improve. And so how do we do this? So the way I think about this issue is thinking of crisis recovery as learning. So I suggest viewing crisis as an opportunity for learning and innovation, but this learning has to be intentional. It can't just come organically. We really have to view this as an opportunity to learn and to innovate. So today I'll be drawing on existing research as well as presenting my own research on how societies and organizations can and have learned to build back better. I start with some examples of cultures and then hone in on the leader and the leader's role in learning and innovation. So I argue that with intentional learning and collective action, organizations can build back better. And this learning has to be intentional, or else we get so caught up in the crisis that we forget to gather up the lessons that we are, we're benefiting right now, even with all the chaos and the problems that we're facing. And so recovery and learning are really two related phases in any crisis situation, from detection to damage control to recovery. And recovery really is sort of the minimal work that needs to be done to get things back to normal, to conduct business and our activities that must be performed. But learning really needs to be more of a reflection and critical examination. And so how do we do this? The good thing is that history shows that crises have and can lead to positive change. In fact, the cultures we see today are a response to a myriad of problems that it has had to solve in its environment, as well as its own internal and structures and systems. So even in really devastating crises, we have seen positive change, innovations to our systems and the way we relate to each other. So there is hope. Even right now, we're doing things and experiencing things that we never thought was possible because it was just not really acceptable, such as working at home with your bunny slippers and your cat walking across the screen. And this has really changed what we see as acceptable, what work is like. And this provides opportunities for work to be more accessible for people with disabilities or with caregiving responsibilities. So we now see that it's possible and it can work. Another example is with gender cultural taboos. So here we have an example of Nepalese women, soldiers in Kathmandu, who are training to do the work that was formerly considered as inappropriate and taboo for women. And this includes being involved in the efforts to manage the COVID crisis, engaging with bodies and victims of COVID-19. This is something that was never, ever accepted in the past. And so this crisis can actually help us break cultural taboos. And cultures really are solutions, and societies and organizations solutions to various problems, including crises, as I've mentioned. Cultures are the products of solving problems in environments that are faced by societies, organizations, and groups. And so extreme problems like we're facing right now allow or actually force organizations and societies to come up with solutions. And so right now, what we're seeing, the responses to the crisis is really a reflection of how societies have learned to respond to various crises. And so whether it's through trial and error or through deliberate action, cultures will evolve and provide solutions for various crises. And so what I like to focus on a bit more is really the role of leaders and the fact that leaders matter a lot in a crisis, not because they're somehow more capable of learning or managing crises. In fact, as we know, history is full of leaders majorly messing up crises responses. But really, leaders are important because in a crisis, people tend to pay more attention to leaders. They look up to leaders for solutions. And so the impact of leaders are particularly strong in a crisis. And leaders do, in fact, hold resources that would shape organizations and societies. And so they do have a tremendous and disproportionate impact on how organizations and societies respond. Furthermore, in a crisis, leaders have to activate their cognitive resources and distribute them across various important processing activities. So they have to be making decisions, and making decisions often on the fly and under time crunches and pressures. And so many challenges plague a crisis situation, in particular a leader. So in 3 of our studies, we've demonstrated how leaders would respond or can respond to a crisis and how emotions and experience influence learning and the display of appropriate leader behaviors. One study was conducted on teams in an insurance company in Korea. And as we know, Korea experienced MERS and another pandemic in 2015. And so we looked at some teams and their leaders and examined how team leaders who had experience in the MERS crisis responded and reacted in the current crisis. And what we found was that leaders with direct experience in the previous pandemic were actually far more effective in supporting their employees, providing assistance that was tangible to the employees, and getting them assured of their place and their position in the organization, and allowing them then to perform well and also engage in adaptive performance in their teamwork. And so the nature of crises really increases the need for leaders to be supportive, given the nature of crises as rare, critical, having a critical impact on organizations, requiring an urgent response, and really idiosyncratic and complex. And crises are often really stressful. They evoke strong negative emotions, and those negative emotions can evoke behavioral rigidities, emotional rigidities that then constrain leaders' decisions and also their behaviors. And so leaders really shouldn't be trying to make decisions on the fly, and direct experiences in that context within that organization and the connections and team and network that they have is really valuable in overcoming the crisis. And so while leaders matter in a crisis, they really cannot act alone. So leaders cannot, acting alone, ensure a viable response to a crisis or a change event as a result of its complexity. So the solutions that leaders have to come up with really must be one that permits effective action by multiple others under high stress and a high stakes condition. And so the leader's role is really to facilitate learning and enacting of innovative solutions. And what I suggest, based on my research and as well as others' research, is that there are few things that a leader needs to take note in order to learn and create better systems and cultures to build back better. So I suggest that a leader needs to show empathy, or an empathetic leader could be more effective in a crisis situation. So empathetic leaders can gather more information that's relationally embedded and tacit information about the situation. And such a leader is more able to reach out to their team members, to others in the organization, and other stakeholders to learn more about the problems, and also to gain more sort of unbiased and important, useful information from others. I also suggest that Being open as a leader is particularly important because under times of crises, leaders' ability to process information is impaired. And so being able to reach out to others and gain perspectives and experiment and learn from others and consider new solutions that would not otherwise be, in the minds of leaders is particularly important. And the third piece of this is rational decision making. In a crisis situation, processing is impaired, leaders are under high stress, and with all the information that the leader gains from their subordinates and from gaining all these different solutions from their subordinates and others, it's important to have a way to systematically diagnose a situation, evaluate various solutions, and coming up with a solution that could be rationalized with various stakeholders, and that would be one that would be most acceptable. And so while I started by emphasizing the role that leaders are important, building back better really is a collective effort. By taking a learning approach and one that is taken with great empathy, openness, and rationality, organizations can capitalize on the window of disruption to make significant progress on various agendas. And so really I want to emphasize that it's both the leaders as well as others. And it's important for leaders to not feel like they're dealing with this crisis alone, but to lean on others and to view building back better as something that is a group effort. And so with that, I thank you, and I'll pass it on to Walid.